welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. This week, a close look at the Southeast Asian country of Myanmar, formerly Burma, and the persecution of ethnic minorities. Is it time for nations like the United States to speak out forcefully about the persecution of the Rohingya, the thousands massacred and forced from their homes? We will also take a look at the very public split between Great Britain and the European Union, Brexit for short. British Prime Minister Theresa May postponed a vote on Brexit in the House of Commons, and now she faces a vote of confidence in her leadership. We will speak to an economist about the potential fallout for many nations around the world, and we will speak to a member of the U.S. Congress about the Rohingya crisis and an historic vote, a loud statement to the world. We are live on Facebook at Voice America, and we want your comments and questions. First up, the humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. How to address the massacre of the Muslim minority there, and what happens next to the 700,000 of those refugees who were forced to flee their homes. Is it terrorism, as Myanmar's government insists, or is it genocide, what the world said would never happen again? Two groups were tasked to get answers recently, delivered their verdict to that question. And as VOA's diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports, their findings have increased pressure on U.S. lawmakers to act.
Amid a brutal military crackdown that started in August of 2017, more than 700,000 Rohingyas have fled their homes in Myanmar's Rakhine state to camps in neighboring Bangladesh. The U.S. State Department commissioned the Public International Law and Policy Group, or PILPG, to send a team to the camps to interview hundreds of refugees and to carefully document human rights violations. Both the PILPG and the U.S. Holocaust Museum have now issued statements concluding that Myanmar committed genocide against the Rohingyas.
It is clear from our intense legal review that there is, in fact, a legal basis to conclude that the Rohingya were the victims of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. As such, we believe there is sufficient basis to bring international criminal proceedings against the perpetrators of this violence and recommend that the international community pursue legal accountability for the atrocity crimes committed in the Rakhine state against the Rohingya.
Experts who have interviewed survivors in war zones across the world said they were shocked by what they heard.
There were efforts to humiliate people, not just kill them or harm them, but to terrorize them.
For its part, Myanmar denies wrongdoing, saying its crackdown was part of a legitimate response to what it terms terrorism in Rakhine State. The Trump administration has accused Myanmar of ethnic cleansing and has placed sanctions on some officials, but has been reluctant to use the term genocide, which would trigger additional measures. On Monday, the U.S. ambassador to Bangladesh, Earl Miller, paid his first visit to Cox's Bazar, known as the world's largest refugee camp.
The United States is doing, along with other international donors, is our assistance is not just for Rohingya. It's for all of the people in Cox's Bazar. And we have an equal amount of aid going to what we call the host communities, but actually we're all one community, aren't we?
Cindy Sain, VOA News, Washington.
This week, the U.S. House of Representatives is considering a resolution declaring the Rohingya refugees of Myanmar victims of genocide. Leading that effort, Congressman Ed Royce, a California Republican who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I spoke with Chairman Royce following debate on the Rohingya resolution.
When we speak with one voice in the United States and we force a determination of genocide, which is the objective here, it sends a very strong message to those who were involved in perpetrating that genocide. We've lost 25,000 human beings have been killed there. Another 19,000 women have been raped. We want to send the message with one voice to those who are involved in this that you will be held accountable. And we want to put things in motion so that the international community understands the gravity of it. So this is a necessity.
And in terms of the White House and Trump administration, are they going to join suit and call this genocide? They have not so far.
So what they have done is to speak out about the incidents, and they're providing humanitarian support. And that's good, but that is not enough. What we need to do is have the House here, have the Congress take the next step, and then have that determination, that finding. So yes, this puts a great deal of pressure on the administration to follow through with the finding of genocide, and we have ample evidence of the extent of that genocide.
Well, the Holocaust Museum here in Washington, D.C. has declared it genocide, and of course, we hear the refrain, never again, but again, it is happening.
It's happening to the extent of 700,000 human beings fleeing over the river, happening to the extent that we have eyewitnesses' accounts of children being thrown into the river and mothers shot when they try to retrieve or save their infants. It is just clearly appalling. And so as a consequence, we have to bring all pressure on Myanmar, on that government in Burma, in order to end this.
Unfortunately, you as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, you're leaving office. Who's going to sort of pick up the mantle? I know Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from the Senate side of the Hill, has been to the region. But I mean, what happens after this vote? Who's going to be talking about it?
I have to share with you, all of the members of my committee, and this is unanimous, have an awareness from all the hearings we've held on this. All feel passionately about this, from Mike McCall to Elliot Engel. You know where we stand, and I think what's important here, we want this to be overwhelming. We want the pressure to be felt and this message to be heard in Burma that the United States is going on record, that we're starting the process of going on record of a finding of genocide so that these atrocities stop.
You know what I appreciate as a citizen? Obviously, I'm a journalist, and I give a lot of you politicians, I jab you a lot, try to get you to say things and give news, and I question you about your positions. But this is an issue that has no political capital. You know, when your committee, when you held hearings on it, nobody was going to get a vote back home. This sort of represented, at least to me, the U.S. Congress speaking about something that was no personal political value to anyone speaking out, but because Congress said this is the right thing to do.
There's a moral obligation, obviously, here for Americans, for all of us, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology, to stand up and say, enough, no genocide on our watch. This has to end now, and then we have to rally the international community. And these are the steps necessary in order to start that process. So that's why we're moving forward.
Increased sanctions on the Myanmar military, is that in the cards?
Not only sanctions, but also increasing the pressure internally. One of the things we have to do is use social media, radio, television, to tell the people inside the country what's actually happening, because their government is giving them disinformation. Their government is saying, oh, it's the Rohingya people, who are committing crimes, without any context to the fact that what's actually happening is the flight of 700,000 people, the loss of 25,000 souls, as people try to get away from their security forces who are shooting them in the back. So this information has to also get into Burma. That's another thing we're working on.
Well, that raises two issues. One is Facebook has gotten a lot of heat because Facebook has been accused of at least helping indirectly, I don't think they intentionally did, the Myanmar military who has inflicted this genocide on the Rohingya. That's the number one thing. The second thing with social media, are you surprised, at least I am, that this is not a topic that the U.S. domestic media has picked up and pounded on day in and day out, this genocide, because it's happening in our lifetime?
I think the capacity here for you and others to do this and raise this and think for a minute about the consequences of controlling information and lack of press freedom. As you know, we have 2 reporters who were given virtually life sentences as a result of their work to try to expose this genocide inside Burma. This becomes an important point. We need to figure out how we lean on our companies here to make certain that dictatorial regimes are not cutting off news and information in country that is necessary in order to expose what is actually happening on a daily basis. We have to figure out how to get the victims a platform. That's what we once did more effectively on Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty, Radio Free Asia. Get them the capability, but now we need to do this also on social media and get that information out there.
Well, why isn't it on social media? I follow all the major social media, and maybe it is once in a while, but it doesn't cost a dime. It takes 2 seconds. But I've oftentimes searched Rohingya, and it surprises me how the U.S. media, maybe on the international media, on Voice America or CNN International, but domestically, outside of perhaps Reuters, because it's their reporters who are in prison in Myanmar. Why do you think it is that I'm not seeing it on U.S. media?
You know, one of the problems is we don't have as many foreign correspondents, frankly, as we used to have. There was a time when the American media took things more responsibly and had far many foreign correspondents. Second, it's the responsibility of us in Congress, right, to do things like we're going to do here with the passage of this measure, which then also becomes news, so that maybe we can generate internationally some press attention to the reality of a genocide going on as we speak. And so I think both of these issues are cases where the moral responsibility is not just with the members of the House and Senate. Moral responsibility is also with the media to do more to tell the truth about a story of this magnitude, an ongoing genocide, and to cover it. And we know the downside risk. We see the two reporters, you know, who've received.
But you could do it safely
sentences
from here. You can do it safely. You don't even have to get arrested in Myanmar. You can do it from your bureau here in Washington.
Exactly. And in terms of social media, so much more could be done to tell the stories. We've heard so many personal stories from people who've come back, even those in the government whose citizenship cards were ripped up, those who had represented the community who were told, no, you're Rohingya. You can never run again for office. You're a non-person. I mean, that's what they've done. They have no right to education for their children, no right to health care, no right to any of the basic things that would be provided to other Burmese. They are locked out. They are in a situation where, from the standpoint of the state, they don't exist. And so they need others to speak with a voice about these conditions. And that's hopefully what this resolution will do, and put in motion the pressure on our federal government then to take those actions.
Aung San Suu Kyi got the highest award you can get from Congress. Should that be rescinded?
I think at this point, yes. I have to share with you, we have talked to her. Look, I know at the end of the day it's the generals making the decision, but even if you're terrified, you have to find a voice to speak out. Even as the army surrounds you, you have to find you know, the ability to stand up and say, no, this is what is happening here in Burma today. This is what is happening to these women. And she needs to find her voice to do that.
Talking about the plight of the Rohingya is one thing, but hearing directly from the refugees themselves is another. You don't forget it. It's seared into your memory. I traveled with the VOA camera crew to Bangladesh earlier this year to the refugee Rohingya camps there. Here's a brief look at the documentary produced by VOA that shows the struggle of Rohingya refugees. You can watch on the VOA's website. It's called Displaced.
From Voice of America, VOA reports from inside the Kutupalong refugee camp in Bangladesh in a 1-hour documentary special, Displaced.
The village was burned. As the houses were set on fire, a lot of the people could not get out. Some were hacked to death, or their bodies were lit on fire. Little children were thrown away violently.
I just can't even imagine how hard this is. I almost don't know what to say to you. You know, I'm at a loss for words. Talking about how dangerous it is, how do you get... And now switching gears to global economic concerns, that messy, high-profile divorce called Brexit. Well, it just got messier. After 4 days of debate and facing almost certain defeat in the British Parliament, Prime Minister Theresa May postponed a vote this week on her government's plan for an orderly exit from the European Union. The plan would have set the terms for the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, laying the groundwork for future trade between the former partners. But that delay has created more uncertainty for Prime Minister Theresa May, as she now faces a vote of confidence in her leadership. VOA's Henry Ridgwell brings us up to date on the latest developments from London.
Decision day, delayed again.
On one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern. As a result, if we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin.
Such an outcome could have proved fatal for Theresa May's leadership. So instead, she heads back to Brussels this week to try to get further reassurances from the EU over the Irish backstop. That legal clause in the deal would keep Britain largely locked into EU rules if the two sides can't agree on a future trade deal. It would avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland, but it is also a red line for many British lawmakers. However, Europe says the negotiations are finished.
The withdrawal agreement, including the Irish backstop, is the only agreement on the table. It took over a year and a half to negotiate. It has the support of 28 governments, and it's not possible to reopen any aspect of that agreement without reopening all aspects of it.
The British pound sterling fell to 20-month lows. There's speculation that market pressure may force MPs to think again and back Theresa May's deal. Others aren't so sure.
I think as that's been speculated about more and more, actually that's been priced into, for example, the price of sterling.
The European Court of Justice appeared to offer one way out, ruling that Britain could revoke its intention to leave the EU on its own without the permission of other EU members. So is Britain about to do a big Brexit U-turn?
If there is this gridlock in Parliament and there's no other way out apart from a no deal, then there looks to be a majority in Parliament for a second referendum.
But Theresa May has rejected calls for another referendum. Opponents say it would only exacerbate growing splits in the country. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
VOA European correspondent Jamie Detmer has covered the Brexit plan from the very beginning, since the 2016 referendum vote, and he joins me here on the set. Nice to see you.
Lovely to be here.
Okay, Jamie, let's pretend you have a crystal ball. What is going to happen in this mess? Is there any turning back on this?
I think it's increased the chances that there could be a second referendum. I heard over the weekend that the Deputy Prime Minister, David Lidington himself, has been talking to advocates of a second referendum in the House of Commons. It's increased the chances that Britain could turn to a membership of the European Free Trade Association, which is a Norway option. It's that you're in Europe in terms of economics, but you're not part of the political structures. But the problem that we're faced is a chaotic House of Commons. You don't have parties anymore, you have factions. And so the possible scenarios are very complicated for people to game.
All right. Now let me take you over to the continent, to the European continent. Let me ask you to generalize two ways. One is the EU, the European Union, those who run it, but the other is the people of Europe, of those countries. How do they look at this?
Well, I think the leaders, the other national leaders, as well as European Commission, are exasperated now. Patience is wearing thin, they tell me. One German lawmaker was saying to me, the odd thing is, this is the agreement that you wanted, and now you want to renegotiate your own agreement. So there's exasperation and there's grave concern that Britain could accidentally fall out of the European Union without a deal, which has not only economic consequences for the UK, United Kingdom, but also for France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in particular as well. Ordinary people, well, I spend a lot of time based out of Italy, and I'm in France a lot. Again, they're surprised that this has gone on for so long. Obviously, some nationalist populists who are not very pro the EU see this as a good thing. Britain's struggling with, with Brussels and the European Commission. But ordinary folk are concerned, it strikes me, about the stability of the European Union, what this may mean to them as well.
All right, and of course the UK is a huge economy. I think it's the 5th largest economy in the world. So its impact, like Germany in the EU, is not insignificant. So it has a global impact.
It has have a global impact. It has an impact on Europe, particularly the closest countries neighbouring the UK. But overall, the cost is greater for the UK. If they go out without a deal, the Bank of England is calculating a drop of 8% in GDP in the UK, whereas in France, Belgium, it will be about 1%. So the major effect is on the UK. In terms of a broader world, some countries see opportunities here for trade deals for them as well. But again, business like certainty. Nissan has a huge car factory in Sunderland. It's the biggest in Europe. They produce 500,000 cars a year. 250,000 of those are sold to Europe. So depending on what kind of deal Britain gets on its exit, if there is an exit, they've got to think about moving part of that plant to build cars in Europe instead. So business investment decisions are being delayed.
Very nice to talk to you. Thank you, Jamie. But the fallout from Brexit and the UK government's inability to agree to an orderly exit plan could have far-reaching implications for Europe and the rest of the world. For more on the economic impact and political impact of Brexit, here's a quick roundup from some of our VOA reporters from around the globe.
I'm Salim Solomon with VOA's Africa Division. Africa and Europe have a shared history that dates back hundreds of years. Some of it not so good, but over the years, the two continents have forged positive bonds through trade, aid, and military cooperation. But now, as the UK prepares to leave the European Union, the question is, how will Brexit and new developments in Europe affect African nations? One major concern is aid. The UK is one of the top countries that finance aid and development projects in Africa. One report suggests the EU's funding for international aid could decline as much as 13%, leading to a 3% drop in aid projects across the globe. The UK is likely to continue funding such projects, but there's a lot of uncertainty over how much they'll spend. Another area of concern are military partnerships. Joint UK and European missions provide security for vessels traveling, for example, near the Horn of Africa. So it's not clear how the absence of aid security partnerships might impact the continent. Until a new exit agreement is finalized, there are genuine concerns and a lot of questions about how Brexit could ultimately impact African nations.
I'm Asadullah Khalid with VOA's Urdu service. Very few people would think of Pakistan when it comes to Brexit discussions. But Pakistan is likely to take a big hit in a finalized divorce between UK and the European Union, unless new trade terms between the parties are negotiated. Europe is Pakistan's largest export destination, with the total export worth nearly $7 billion as per 2016 and 17 numbers. Pakistan also enjoys a positive trade balance with UK for many years and has been actively seeking a post-Brexit trade agreement. Another element where Pakistan could see changes is the value of remittances from UK, as they weigh almost 20% of the total remittances of Pakistan. Along with this, foreign direct investment or foreign investment from Great Britain would be a concern which is coming through non-resident Pakistanis. Any economic slowdown in UK by Brexit uncertainty could also lead to the value of pound sterling to drop as well, and that will make exports from Pakistan a bit more expensive. Another concern is the UK's aid to the developing countries. That includes Pakistan as well. The Department of International Development, that is DFID, currently allocates about £373 million or almost $470 million. Some analysts are predicting if UK's economy slows down post-Brexit, that would certainly impact the international assistance they are giving out. Asadullah Khalid, VOA's Urdu service, back to Plugged In.
So what does all this uncertainty mean long-term for the world? To discuss the global economic impact, we are joined by Douglas Rediker of the Brookings Institution. Doug, tell me, with all the uncertainty of Brexit, Is it likely to make the markets worldwide unstable, or is it just sort of our curiosity as we're watching? Is this a real fear for the world markets?
Well, it's been a slow-moving train wreck, right? It's been going on for 2 years, and the markets are watching with a variety of levels of attention. In the past, it has been sort of assumed that it's Europe, a stupid outcome, a really dangerous outcome. So I would call that the March 29th comes, there's no deal, and the next day there's absolutely no rules of the road. That bad outcome has largely been ignored by the markets because it just wasn't in anyone's interest to do so. That's becoming more of a possibility. Again, not because anybody really wants to crash out without a deal, although there are those who do, it's still a small number. The point is there's so many miscalculations on the part of the UK political environment, both the Tories, the Labour Party, the government, the Parliament, all of the various factions are misunderstanding what they're really up against, and they're up against a clock that's ticking. And that ticking clock is not their friend. And a lot of the scenarios that they're anticipating will end up being the way to avert that disaster are not necessarily going to be a case that they can avoid it. So the markets are starting to price that in. If it gets that way, it's going to actually be a significant downturn.
Well, you know, as you watch this, I mean, there's quite a lot of intrigue. You've got Prime Minister May with all this other factions within her party, and sort of fascinating. But if you step back and think, wow, you know, it's really going to have an impact like in Africa with aid, potentially Pakistan. We just heard from our VOA reporters on both the aids to those two parts of the world. And then you've got Northern Ireland with, you know, the complex issues they have with the UK. Is that it is a very complicated chessboard.
It's an extraordinarily complicated chessboard. So not to take anything away from the excellent reporting of the segments you just referred to, but on a global scale, those are still relatively small amounts of money. They're obviously important to those that receive aid from the British government, from remittances and other transactions with Pakistan and others. But the bigger global issues are really going to be those that involve financial markets. The UK is one of the leading financial centers in the world, and the expectation has been that there will be some transition deal that allows financial markets to continue to operate largely unimpeded. There's already moves out of London to Frankfurt, to Paris, to Dublin for some of the smaller, or let's say the more plumbing-related financial activities in anticipation of next year's Brexit. But if, in fact, this ends badly, so if, in fact, there's a hard Brexit without a new deal, then financial markets around the world, that's trillions of dollars. That's where the real destabilizing impact is going to be. That's not to diminish any country's individual impact, whether it is in Africa or Pakistan or others. But the real global destabilizing event would be financial market-based and significant trade-based with the EU. That's a real disruption that nobody wants to see, but it's a possibility.
Doug, thank you. And of course, not only are the Brits watching, the people in the EU, the whole world is watching this one. Thank you, Doug.
You got it. Thanks, Greta.
Now for my final thoughts. Monday, December 10th, was World Human Rights Day. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo marked the occasion with a tweet to remember Americans still held hostage by Iran, including retired FBI Special Agent Robert Bob Levinson. Family members of 6 American hostages still being held in Iran, including Levinson's, co-authored an open letter calling on world leaders, human rights organizations, and media outlets to renew their efforts to free the hostages. The letter begins, "We are the families of political hostages in Iran, and we ask for your urgent action. We come from many countries with different backgrounds and perspectives, but we have banded together to come to you in one voice. We shall remain quiet no longer." Robert Levinson, an American citizen, disappeared on Kish Island, Iran on March 9, 2007. His family states, "The Iranian government has never publicly admitted to taking Bob, as his family calls him, but a press TV article initially reported he was being held by security forces and would be freed in a matter of days. 4,287 days later, Bob's family still has had no contact with him. He's been held without his most basic human rights. That's all the time we have. Thank you for watching Plugged In.